It is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful empowered harmonizers. And we are zooming in and focusing in on what I feel is a very important topic when it comes to really healing and working through a relationship that has been wrought with manipulation, with toxicity, with someone who may be narcissistic or psychopathic, someone who has a pathological sense of self-importance and really sort of an oversized ego, if you will, that tends to draw a lot of attention in a myriad of ways. However, there's something very specific that I feel is very crucial for you to understand when you are dealing with these kinds of individuals. Before we get started, I want to give a super huge shout out to those of you who have recently emailed and donated to the channel. Thank you so much. It's great to hear from you. It has been a while since we've been posting. I've been on a wonderful, glorious vacation in Cabo, San Lucas, and we're back full throttle here. So we're going at it back stronger than ever. So I really feel sort of called and drawn to create content on this topic, really sort of the element of the ego and over idealization that tends to be set forth by these types of individuals. And the persona becomes that of idealization. In other words, you sort of covered them. They want to have this certain connection with you, which they are always in control of. And when we talk about people who are narcissistic or psychopathic, we're of course talking about, specific two distinct and separate personalities. However, there's a spectrum that I feel that those individuals who are around them, who are close with them, who have had relationships, encounters, brush-ups, whether it's in a family or a love interest, or this was your friend, your neighbor, or your family member, your colleague, whomever, whoever, this person was in your life, it's very important for you to understand a little bit of the groundwork, a little bit about the distinction that separates them and why there's a causative issue of pain and how it sort of mars people, how it sort of catches people or messes people up. And when we look at this effect, in other words, that's caused by these types of relationships with people who present with a pathological sense of self-importance and coupled with a lack of empathy. So if you can really kind of get it simplified down, if you look at these two elements, these people really, just based on that. And then, of course, there's a whole spectrum and variety, once again, of how they present and to what degree they scope out their supply. But really, the pattern is very consistent. There's a great continuity that I see in the people that I work with, in the comments that present. And it's, based on many years of study of this that I really want to sort of pull out or extrapolate a number of different content or areas for you to understand as you work through this. And namely that of also what John Bradshaw alludes to in his book Homecoming is sort of this topic of idealization. And sort of if you look at the polar opposite, sort of the idealization versus degradation. And people then tend to be on, the spectrum of this. And then shame versus shamelessness. And so the narcissist and the psychopath tend to be very shameless. They're, they'll do things that are really just, let's just call it whacked. I mean, they just will come out of the woodwork with things that they say, things that they do. Most people wouldn't go there. They would draw the line. They'd have what you call a boundary and a standard. In other words, I'm not going to dress this scantily dressed, when I go to this, family party, or I wouldn't say this to a colleague, or it would be out of line for me. This is the rule that the narcissist or the psychopath is looking to bend. And not just in a funny way like, let me push the envelope here we're talking about a very serious and hurtful manner. Like, remember back in the day, there was that t-shirt, "It's always fun until somebody gets hurt." Well, really, the problem with the relationship with a narcissist or a psychopath, particularly, is that of lack of empathy. Lack of empathy, meaning they don't really know what it's like to walk in another's shoes. They can't really sort of drop down their agenda and listen to that of another because of this sort of hyper-inflated ego. A pathological, meaning diseased, disordered, not healthy, not on the bell curve. If you've studied statistics, you look at the bell curve where, people sort of fall in the middle, and then you've got these extremes on the end. You're in the pathology. You're in a smaller percent of the population. You hear about the 1%ers, the 4%ers. And, really, when you talk about pathology, you're getting into an area of sickness or disorder or disconnect and dysfunction. In other words, there's going to be some disease or disorder as a result of being in a relationship with them. In other words, there's going to be more chaos than order. There's going to be more drama than there is common sense and practicality. There's going to be a lot of shaming and scapegoating and brainwashing of those people around them so that they then are promulgated to the other end of the spectrum. And particularly when we talk about the narcissist in this video here, you're talking about someone who is always in a comparison mode. They're always sort of trying to either drop names, associate themselves with particularly great people, or that they have a great talent, or that they're special and unique in some way. But the problem is that the room isn't big enough for the both of them. There's not room enough for there to be two special people, particularly when you get into an intimate relationship. There's always a juxtaposition. There's always a comparison. There's always a setting you up, as you compare to. There's always this comparison, and they'll always have like an agenda, or what I call sort of the invisible measuring stick. Do you measure up? Can you jump this high? Can you, do this and this and this for me? In other words, and it's always one directional, meaning they set the judgment. They set the comparison. And they are the ones to dish out the shame. And, in other words, the snide comments, the sort of, you're not good enough for me, but I'm going to hang on to you anyway, sort of air that they sort of cast about them. Because the narcissist, particularly, those people who are overt, they really have friends more for status or for what you can do for me. It's not because of a common bond and a shared give and take. It's more like, oh yeah, if you look at the Hollywood circles or a lot of the finance circles, it's a lot of people using each other. So there's this feeling of being used or played by these people, particularly in the realm of what we would call the ego. And so it's very important when you look at sort of the understanding of the parts and dynamics of a relationship with these individuals. The ego is disproportionate. It's too big. It's just, as they might say, big hat, no cattle. I mean, there's a imbalance, especially as you move on in the relationship with them, where after the love bombing phase, you're finding that you're in that, devaluing stage, which is very common with these types of individuals, narcissistic and psychopathic. And the devaluing is always according to their illusory or their illusion of what fits the guidelines or gradient of what is acceptable, what is lovable, what is valuable, what is attractive, and they will put you to the test. In other words, will you meet their qualifications? And there's always this judgment, this, constant, you're having to conform and meet their standards. And it's never the other way around. See, but the big hat In other words, it tends to overshadow and make you unaware of and imperceptive to your own needs, and really sort of squeeze out your own needs from the relationship. So their needs sort of take over everything. Especially as you move on in time with these individuals, it becomes very imbalanced. In other words, there's not a 50-50 shake. There's not a 60-40. There's not even a 7-30. It'll eventually become 80-20. It'll get even more severe until something either erupts or explodes, or someone just walks away and says, this is ridiculous. I deserve better. However, that statement oftentimes is very difficult to arrive at for people in a healthy sort of mindset, because they get so much sort of invested in fitting into the agenda, the judgment, the good or bad, the acceptable or unacceptable. You approve of me or you disapprove of me. People then, they get into this sort of hamster wheel of pleasing the narcissist, pleasing the psychopath, becoming the person that they want their ideal to be. Notice the ideal is very illusory. So especially for those people who are big-hearted, who are your romantics, who are your big macho men, or your real soft females, there's going to be this sort of inner struggle then that's going to occur, where then the people pleasing begins to become predominant in the relationship, where you're trying to become the lovable, become the best, become the number one. And usually, as there's a number of others, supplies waiting in the wings, there's always going to be like a triangulation situation where they're moving, and that's just a whole nother video. It's so packed. But when I'm talking about in this video is the triangulation, where they're trying to juxtaposition other people or other values, or other, sort of where you have to sort of jockey for position. And the problem is that the narcissist tends to overshadow and make more important their needs than other people's needs. In other words, your genuine needs for attention, affection, communication, get whittled down and thrown out the window, out to the wayside, back by the dumpster. You begin basically to become relegated to the not so important pile when you're with these individuals. And because this lack of empathy, with a narcissist, is because the more that they can put their ego out there and get more attention, get more people who are trying to please them and be in agreement with and stroke the ego of, i.e., fan their flame, fan their ego, be in agreement with, and prop them up so they, loom even taller, and more important, more talented, whatever the quality it is that they're looking in the individual. For each person, there's always going to be something that becomes, what they're always sort of their ego is about, that becomes then to sort of push others out, others' needs out, others' voices out. So it becomes, indistinguishable, undefinable, unretrievable. You feel like you lose voice in the relationship. You lose perspective. That is the problem. So if you were to understand a lot of the cause that's created the effect of why, this occurred for so long, and why it was so difficult to see it until, why did it get so bad? A lot of viewers say that same thing. It's because the ego and this judgment of good versus bad. I approve of you versus I approve of you. I take you in versus I reject you. There's always this back and forth, this jockeying for that acceptance, that love, the in. I'm the number one. I'm not the number two. I'm not, less important than your music, or I'm not more important than this family or this job. There's always this jockeying that we see with a narcissist. It's the ego that has to be stroked. But the problem is that the people end up sacrificing to give to the ego rather than being on the receiving end, to be receiving. And especially those people who have, that guilt complex or that martyrdom, I must always, be the man and do all this and give and provide. That might be part of the causative factor of why it takes so long, or why it's, it attacks your sense of masculinity and what it is to be a man. And so then that becomes all, up for grabs, and am I man enough? And so you then, you lose perspective. People begin to over-idealize the narcissist, over-idealize the psychopath. They're losing perspective because of this sort of idiosyncratic ego, or in the state of the psychopath, just this completely masterminded persona that they create to fit the needs, very customized, like a very specific cutout, just specifically for that person. Telling them what they want to hear, being for them for the way that they need to be, being the trophy woman or the perfect fit. It's this luminous, relationship where no one else compares. There's this feeling of trying to regain this. And there's this idealization of this relationship or the person that is so very important that you come down from in order to heal. It's important that you realize that these people, because of their personality construct, type, be it a narcissistic personality disorder or antisocial, either way, you can have a lot of blending if you ask me. And we're not here to label, judge, diagnose, treat. What I'm referring to, because I think it's very important that when you go through your healing, you kind of, begin to loosen up on the labels, because your essence is what is important. And your essence, where the healing is going to take place, is where we kind of let go of a lot of these labels and this, they're so good and I'm so bad. Because oftentimes those descriptors that you hang on to yourself and identify with, the I'm unlovable, I just had a crap ride, it's never going to turn around. You're hanging all these sort of, just drummed up false negatives about yourself. And then that becomes then the self-sabotage, and you lose perspective. So I know that this is in deep, but it's been a while since we have posted. So it's kind of like, I feel like it's going to be crammed in for a little bit for the next maybe several days or several weeks, as we kind of address the questions that have been piling up. So, and yes, I've been reading the comments and catching up now. But it's to understand that for you to really come through is to understand that the ego and their needs and their voice and their image, and especially as it's represented in your mind, is like a 50-yard what's it called, when you're driving along the billboard. Okay, so it's like looming large in your mind. It takes up and absorbs all of your mental faculties, your psychological and psychic energy, particularly as it pertains to being able to live in the present and being able to dream and decide and make decisions about your future. So the prefrontal cortex, which is your planning and judgment, it gets sort of really wrapped up, entangled, and it gets trying to sort things out so you can then fulfill that. But it robs you of your present, and it robs you of your perspective. When you are hyper pleasing or in that hyper aroused state where things are too intense, there's too much tension. There's too much riding on the line. This person is over idealized and over represented in your mind. But this person that, but this, woman that, but this guy this. Once again, it is the ego of the narcissist, which once again, it's important for you to understand, as well as in the psychopath, that oftentimes this is illusory. It is an illusion. What you see is not what you get with a narcissist or a psychopath. What you fell in love with is not really what's putting the blessing on your life. Although it will put a blessing on your life on down the road. So there is good and a lot of actually good direction and guidance that your life will take as a result of this. In fact, I liken it to like a tsunami wave that, although very destructive, throws you onto, a peaceful, beautiful island, with music playing and drums and, and coconuts and flowers filling the air. And, it basically lands you to where you're going to find your solace, but it kind of throws you there in a very painful and very, like a shipwreck sort of way. It just, you get cast out to look at this and deal with this. And so it is the ego, which is based on judgment. And I know we're getting super psychological, but this will help you. I'm trying to make this easy. It is the judgment of good versus bad, better versus worse. It is this judgment, which is the invisible or sometimes very visible yardstick or, measuring stick. Do you measure up, is what you're always thrown up against. And then trying to reclaim that top notch which is then part of how the narcissist and the psychopath will keep their supply going. Is they'll see that people then are vying for their attention, for their time, for their love, for their marriage, and to be the one in their eyes. So trying to always be the apple of their eye or whatever it is. The sparkle of the eye, the good guy, the good girl, trying to always sort of control this outcome from this individual who does not have empathy, but has a pathological a sense of self-importance, which drives them to do things to other people that are manipulative, that are betraying, that are less than in your best interest, i.e. the people who have been sort of victimized by this in many concrete and life-altering and life-changing ways, until you really sort of get back on the path, things can look very bleak. Things can look very scary. So, until you really kind of get your footing. And so it's to understand, though, that this is an illusion and it has nothing to do with the reality and the essence and the wonderful, amazing, magnificent person who you are and all you have to give and your strengths has not been reflected, or you have not been able to enjoy it and live from that essence because of this chaos that has been engineered by this individual. Meaning that of this judgment, this illusion of a measuring stick, which you feel you must live up to. Once again, I go back to the root word of education, which is educare, to bring out. So true education is to bring out the best of each individual. We're not here to reform the individual, the education system, but true teachers and true mentors, and to truly be educated is to bring out the best that is within you, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're a craftsman, whether you're an athlete, whether you're an artist, whether you're a IT engineer, a software developer, or a videographer, or a photographer, or a chef, or a mom, or a dad, or an uncle. It's to bring out that which is within you. And that really is sort of a shortcoming that this judgment, which it causes a lot of people to miss the mark of their own goodness, their own greatness, their own magnificence, really being happy. And, to be in a relationship that works and to feel that they are lovable and loved, versus the contrary. And so it is very important. And I know that it looks like the things are wrapping up here, but I want you to sort of come to a state of neutrality. If you can sort of come to the present moment and then stop that definition of good versus bad, these sort of extremes and all these sort of definitions, if you can release those and let those go, particularly as they were created for you by this individual, and stop comparing yourself according to this illusory measuring stick. Stop that evaluation. It'll help you to release a lot of that tension and then that anxiety and heavy weightedness that tends to sort of be a block and a barrier to moving on and moving forward in your life and attracting relationships that are truly the juicy, the